Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the big news of the day. The 4th of December every year is marked by the Indian Navy as Navy Day to commemorate one of the legendary maritime operations ever witnessed, that is Operation Trident, which was a key offensive of the Indian Navy during the 1971 India-Pakistan War. So this historic day is marked by the Indian Navy as Navy Day every year. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi also has sent out his best wishes to the Indian Navy by highlighting India's rich maritime history. On this historic day, the Indian Navy not only commemorates the success seen during Operation Trident, but also uses it as an occasion to take stock of the challenges of the future and how best the Indian Navy could gear up to meet these challenges. So, in this context, it becomes very important to understand what really happened on the 4th of December and what was Operation Trident all about. Operation Trident of 1971 was an offensive operation of the Indian Navy targeted against the Karachi harbour, which was not just the major port of Pakistan, but also the headquarters of the Pakistani Navy, and thus was a prized asset for Pakistan, particularly during the 1971 war. To further understand the significance of this operation, you need the background to the 1971 war. The 1971 India Pakistan War is also known as the Liberation of Bangladesh War, and the genesis of this conflict lies in then East Pakistan. In East Pakistan, the Pakistani state and the army unleashed a genocide against the Bengali population, which had triggered a massive refugee crisis by 1970-71. Especially after the Pakistani army launched Operation Searchlight on 24th March 1971, the Pakistani army would unleash mass atrocities against the Bengalis, targeting not just the liberation movement and the freedom fighters, but would also target intellectuals, women, children, etc. So, as India was staring at a massive refugee crisis, India also sensed a strategic opportunity to get back at Pakistan while parallelly protecting the Bengali minorities. It was then that India decided to get directly involved in this crisis, which was brewing in East Pakistan, and under the then leadership of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, India first launched a covert war in East Pakistan, which was led by India's newly created intelligence agency, RAW, or the Research and Analysis Wing, which was headed by its founding director, R.N. Kao, who was not only seen as very close to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, but was also seen as a legendary spy master. In this covert phase of the war, India would start arming the Mukti Bahini rebels and thereby enable the internal weakening of Pakistan even before the overt war started in December 1971. As India was directly aiding the liberation movement and providing covert support to the rebels, it was only a matter of days before this could turn into an overt war, and promptly the Indian armed forces were preparing for such an eventual conflict under the leadership of then Chief of Army Staff Sam Manekshaw, the then Chief of Naval Staff S.M. Nanda or Charles Nanda, and the then Chief of Air Staff Pratap Chandra Lal. Eventually, in this conflict, which came to an end on the 16th of December 1971, India registered an all round victory, not just in the covert secret war that India was fighting, but also in all the three domains of warfare, including land, air, and sea. In this discussion, we will particularly focus on the maritime operations of the Indian Navy, as the Indian Navy went into this war with a lot to prove, because in the previous conflict of 1965 with Pakistan, the Indian Navy had been forced by the government to adopt a defensive posture for strategic reasons without being directly involved in the conflict. This limited role of the Indian Navy in India's wars between 1947 to 1965 was seen as a direct result of the short sightedness of India's leadership in understanding and appreciating the strategic implications of maritime power. But the period between 1966 and 1971 saw the modernization of the Indian Navy with modern warships, missiles, and other critical maritime assets being procured from the Soviet Union. Because after the 1965 war, Britain had refused to supply any modern warships to the Indian Navy, and thus India started looking towards the Soviet Union for assistance in modernizing its armed forces, particularly the Indian Navy. So, in the prelude to the 1971 war between India and Pakistan, the covert warfare between the respective intelligence agencies had already begun from 1969-1970 itself. During this phase, India's RAW was already arming and enabling the Mukti Bahini rebels to internally weaken Pakistan. And as expected, Pakistan eventually retaliated against India by first launching the overt war on the 3rd of December 1971. This war began with the Pakistani Air Force carrying out preemptive strikes on the western front of India, which pushed India to formally declare war against Pakistan in the early hours of December 4th. In the months and years leading up to this date, the Indian Navy had been planning and preparing to launch major offensive operations against Pakistan in case of an eventual conflict, and obviously Karachi was the prime target for the Indian Navy. Karachi was not just the commercial hub of Pakistan and the financial capital, but was also host to a major port and harbour, along with being the headquarters of the Pakistani Navy. So the critical installations of the Navy, the harbour installations, and the prime economic targets were under the lens of the Indian Navy, and the then Admiral Charles Nanda or S.M. Nanda, who had taken over as the naval chief in 1970, had decided to adopt an aggressive posture to give the Navy a new outlook in India's warfare. So when India declared war against Pakistan on the 4th of December, India employed all the three branches of the armed forces, which made it India's first major tri-service military operation against an enemy country. On the 4th of December, under Operation Trident, the Indian Navy set its sight on Karachi, especially the Karachi harbour and port, and this key mission was led by the Vidyut class, which included missile boats such as INS Nipat, Nigat, and Veer, which were basically procured from the Soviet Union. And these Osa missile boats, which were fitted with the Styx missiles, were the star of this operation. These missile boats of the Vidyut class were accompanied by anti-submarine corvettes and other support vessels such as Kiltan and Kachal, and in a daring operation launched from the western coast of India, the Indian naval vessels surrounded Karachi and mounted a decisive missile strike against Pakistani vessels and also against the Pakistani harbour. This led to the sinking of multiple Pakistani naval ships and as well as merchant vessels, in which hundreds of Pakistani sailors were killed, thus inflicting significant losses to Pakistan right at the start of the war. This came as a major setback to Pakistan, and Pakistan was left shaken. And parallelly, the Indian Air Force conducted an independent strafing operation at the Karachi harbour, which targeted the Kemari oil tanks and essentially set the Karachi harbour on fire. In the initial years, the Indian Air Force had not claimed this attack, and many still have the wrong presumption that the Karachi oil tanks were targeted by the Indian Navy. But contrary to that, it was the Indian Air Force which led an independent operation parallel to Operation Trident, which led to the destruction of Kemari oil tanks that set Karachi on fire. These Soviet Osa missile boats played a critical role in launching precision strikes against Pakistani vessels and against the Karachi harbour, and on the next day, the Indian Navy would receive the code word Angar, which meant that Operation Trident was a success. As a follow-up to Operation Trident, Indian Navy launched Operation Python 4 days later on the 8th of December, which was a follow-up strike against Karachi. Again, a naval strike group consisting of missile boats and frigates mounted a major strike against Karachi, targeting multiple ships. And again, the Indian Navy inflicted very heavy damage on Pakistan. Pakistani fleet tanker PNS Dhaka was completely damaged, and this time the Kemari oil tank facility was completely destroyed by the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force. Few foreign ships and merchant vessels were also destroyed, with a complete blockade being placed across the Karachi harbour, and parallelly the Indian Air Force mounted a air raid, destroying the major airfields of Pakistani Air Force located at Karachi. This ensured that the Pakistani Air Force could not intervene and target the Indian naval vessels. Many war historians and strategic experts see Operation Trident, Operation Python, and these pre planned moves of the Indian Air Force as critical in defanging Pakistan on the Western Front, as these operations destroyed the fuel and ammunition depots at Karachi, thus crippling the Pakistani Navy and Air Force and depriving Pakistan of more than 50% of its fuel requirement. The damages suffered by Pakistan in these operations were estimated at around $3 billion, because India not only destroyed critical naval equipment but also damaged oil reserves, ammunition depots, warehouses, etc. These combined operations of the Navy and the Air Force crippled the flying operations of Pakistani Air Force. and it would play a critical role in ensuring the defeat of Pakistan, especially after Pakistan surrendered in the Eastern Front. The Navy, Army, and Air Force would play an equally important role on the Eastern Front, as the Navy successfully imposed a blockade which prevented West Pakistan from sending any reinforcements to East Pakistan, while the Indian Air Force and the Army carried out deep offensive operations that eventually led to the surrender of the Pakistani army. This legendary image that you see over here depicts Lieutenant General A.K. Niazi of Pakistani Army officially signing the instrument of surrender in front of Lieutenant General J.S. Arora at Dhaka, which marked the defeat of Pakistan on the Eastern Front and eventually brought the war to an end with the liberation of Bangladesh. So it's because of this reason that Operation Trident is seen as a major military operation of India, and this historic day, that is 4th of December, is still marked as Navy Day. On this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end, and if you found the initiative to be helpful, do like the video, share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.